Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Brookman, Associate Director of Knowledge Transfer and Exchange, and on behalf of Dr. Jack Callahan, Director of the Center of Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders, or CRE-MSD as we are more commonly known, we'd like to thank you for joining us today for this free webinar about hybrid work arrangements and ergonomics using mobile computing devices at multiple locations. We are grateful to the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development for our funding, which supports the delivery of these webinars, and to our presenters who provide their expertise. We ask that you keep yourself muted for the duration of the webinar as a courtesy to the presenter and all participants. The format of today's webinar is as follows. The presentation will be given, after which time we will have 10 to 15 minutes for a question and answer period with our presenter. During the question and answer period, we ask that you type your questions into the chat box. The chat box can be pulled up on your screen by selecting the chat icon in the control panel that appears near the bottom of your screen. I will relay these questions to the presenter, or a similar question should we have a duplication in themes. Should you have a pressing question or issue such as a technology glitch that cannot wait until the end of the presentation, please type this into the chat box and we will do our best to address it right away. This webinar is being recorded, with the recording being made available to you on our website along with the presenter slides shortly after today's webinar. You will also be sent a link to an evaluation. Please fill this evaluation out, as it will assist us in the future delivery of our webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today, and remember to watch the CRE-MSD website and the MSD Prevention website for other webinars with this theme of remote work resources and events. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our presenter today. Meszaros is a Canadian Certified Professional Ergonomist and the Ergonomics Research Coordinator at CRE-MSD. Kim's main focus is maintaining and developing the MSD Prevention Guideline for Ontario and collaborating with stakeholders to share and create MSD prevention resources for workplaces. She is also the Principal Ergonomist at Kinetic Care and the National Student Committee Advisor for the Association of Canadian Ergonomists, also known as ACE. Thank you so much, Kim, for agreeing to present today, and now over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Catherine. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the webinar today. I'll be reviewing findings from a survey conducted on working from home during the pandemic. These results will provide insight into teleworkers' motivations and preferences for hybrid work, as well as the impact of remote workstation setup and work organization on discomfort and MSD, or musculoskeletal disorders. So in today's webinar, we will start with talking about the study background. We'll get into the survey results specifically around work arrangements. So looking at the actual work arrangements over the pandemic and talking a little bit about the preferences. And then we'll get into the home workstation setup and work organization during the pandemic. Then we'll get into the analysis, so looking at associations between workstation setup and organization and discomfort and MSD. We'll talk a little bit about hybrid work and workplace responsibilities, and then we'll finish off with some recommendations. So why did we conduct this study? At the beginning of the pandemic, some other research groups conducted surveys on health and wellness of office workers, and these office workers were required to work from home during the pandemic. Our study built on these studies, and the data collection was carried out mid-pandemic, as the survey was issued between March and May of 2022. So when generating the questions for our survey, we took a more holistic approach to identify potential associations and contributing factors to specific outcome measures. So we were looking at discomfort and injury and also mental health and stress levels. So understanding these associations helps to identify considerations for post-pandemic working arrangements for computer-based work. This slide just demonstrates the survey structure. It was structured into 7 different sections, which utilized several different questions and scales that had very good psychometric properties from past studies. The studies that we had reference questions from are listed below in the dark green. So we had 55 questions in total in the survey, and the survey was completed through an online platform and marketed by stakeholders in the Ontario Health and Safety System. And it was also available on the CRE-MSD website for access and other stakeholder websites as well. So just a quick summary of the demographics of the individuals who completed our study. We had a total of 1,002 who completed surveys, and we had much more participation from female workers, which was in alignment with the CISWP study. They reported 70% of their respondents were females, and ours was 72.4. For the age group, the highest number of respondents were in the 46 to 55-year range. Taking a look at location, almost 80% of our respondents resided in Ontario. For company size, the majority of respondents worked in a large corporation, so that was around 70%. And then the main role, just over half of respondents were in a non-managerial employee role, and almost 25% were managers or directors. Taking a look at the different industry sectors, the top 3 were education and training, healthcare and social assistance, and public administration and safety. So let's get into talking about work arrangements. It's important to note that 97% of surveyed workers reported having a change in their work arrangement due to the pandemic, and 70% reported already working in a hybrid work arrangement for a period of time throughout the pandemic when we issued the survey. So you can see anywhere from orange to green, or it was some duration of time spent in a hybrid work arrangement. So sometimes working at home and sometimes at the workplace. Since hybrid work involves partially working from home, it's important to identify concern areas associated with the home workstation to help us guide recommendations for optimizing comfort and productivity. So we asked participants about their preferred work arrangement post-pandemic, and the most frequent response was working remotely 5 days a week. However, 67% of respondents would prefer some form of hybrid work arrangement. So this would be anywhere from 1 day working at home per week to 4 days per week. Then we followed up and asked if they felt this preference would be supported by their employer. So working from home only resulted in the highest response of likely not being supported by the employer at 43%. When we switch and take a look at the hybrid scenarios, workers felt that the employer would support the decision. 49 to 63% felt they would support that decision of hybrid work. And of the minority preferring full-time in the office, 89% were confident that their employers would support this work arrangement. To gain insight into the motivations of working from home, we provided a list of potential reasons and asked respondents to select all that apply to them. So this chart displays all the potential reasons that we listed in the survey. And the top 5 are presented at the top of this graph. So better work-life balance was the most frequent response for those preferring to work remote only. And transportation commute time was the most frequent response for hybrid work preference. Looking a little bit deeper into the responses for the hybrid work arrangement, Transportation commuting time was the most frequent response for those preferring to work from home 2 to 4 days per week. And better work-life balance was the most common reason for wanting 1 day at home per week. Now we'll get into the survey results for the characteristics of working from home section of the survey. In terms of home workstations, the majority, or 68%, reported having their own space in a separate room. We also asked about their comfort level in their home workstation compared to their usual workstation before the pandemic. So through correlation analysis, the comfort level in the home office was positively associated with the preference for more days working from home. Differences in the home workstation environment also had an impact on preferred work arrangements. 81% of those preferring to work from home those who preferred working from home only, so 5 days a week at home, had a dedicated space in a separate room to work in. The individuals who were needing to find a workspace were more likely to prefer returning on-site 5 days a week. So this concept of teleworkers having their own dedicated workspace is in alignment with the recommendations provided by the World Health Organization and International Labor Organization. And I'll provide a link to that resource at the end of the webinar. For types of work surfaces, the traditional desk was the most commonly used work surface for home workstations, with 58% reporting frequent use. And by frequent, I'm looking at categories often to always. 22% were still frequently using some sort of makeshift workstation. So this could be a kitchen table, a dining room table, folding table, shelf, custom-made surface. There was a lot of different options that people were mentioning in the other section that would fall under the makeshift workstation. And 21% had purchased a sit-stand workstation that they were using regularly at home. The laptop was the most commonly used computing device when teleworking. 73% of respondents always used a laptop, which was similar to a previous study, the Cincinnati study. They reported 69% of their respondents using a laptop. Previous studies have shown that the usage of laptop computers can cause awkward wrist postures during typing on the keyboard or using the touchpad, arms not being supported, which places stress on the upper back and shoulder, and neck flex to look down at the screen. So then we asked specifically about the external devices that were used with the laptop. As you can see by the graphs here, the external mouse was the most commonly used external device with the laptop. So 79% of laptop users were frequently using an external mouse. 62% reported frequently using an external keyboard with their laptop. And there were a different combination of devices used for screen positioning. So this could be a laptop riser, an external monitor, use of monitor risers or arms. And I'll get into this in a little bit more detail in the next slide. Some other devices that were mentioned through the survey were use of headsets, headphones, and microphones. Sit-stand devices that were on the tabletop, and docking stations were a popular response as well. So it's important to recognize how the location of our devices can influence our posture. These examples I've provided here demonstrate the flexed neck postures and unsupported seated back postures that commonly occur when looking downwards at the laptop on the work surface. Frequent or constant exposure to these types of postures over the workday can lead to body discomfort and could potentially lead to musculoskeletal disorders. We were interested in how many frequent laptop users were regularly using external devices, which would impact the screen position. We found that 71% of frequent laptop users had the ability to raise the screen using a riser, an external monitor, or combination of both the riser and the monitor. And then 133 respondents were actually not using devices to change the position of the laptop. Of that group, 88% were also using the laptop keyboard, indicating that the postures adopted would likely look like this picture here. Now switching over to tablet use, only 7% of respondents reported using a tablet regularly when working from home. So frequent tablet users, that group was 70, were more likely to use external devices on a regular basis, such as an external keyboard, mouse, standalone monitor, or tablet riser, versus the infrequent users of tablets. So this is encouraging to see that if you're using a device more often, that you're supporting raising the screen and using alternative devices to set yourself up for optimal postures. Switching into seating at home, 75% were seated in an office chair, and this was often to always when working from home. And for those using an office chair, the seat height adjustability and the presence of armrests were the most common features identified on the chair. And most importantly, over 80% reported using adjustability features of their chair to support their body. When asking about the use of a lumbar support in the seated posture, it was concerning that 30% of teleworkers reported not having any form of lumbar support. However, almost 60% reported having frequent contact with the backrest. So the question was, is the presence of lumbar support related to the contact with the backrest? And we found that those with some level of lumbar support, whether it be built into the chair or an external support, reported more frequent contact with the backrest compared to those without lumbar support. We also asked about work pacing and posture breaks throughout the workday. This graph shows frequency of posture change per day on the x-axis, and the stacked columns are the duration of time before taking a break. In a recent study, they found that the changes in positions from sitting to standing or walking at work every hour could reduce the risks of MSD by more than 30%. When applying this principle to an 8-hour workday, it was found that 7% of our respondents, so frequent laptop users, would be achieving this recommendation, which is quite low. And there was a wide range of responses for the total amount of active movement during the workday. The most frequent response was between 16 and 30 minutes of active movement per day. Another interesting finding was the type of support that was provided by the employer. So the survey results indicated that 74% of respondents were allowed to take home equipment from the office. So for larger pieces of equipment, this solution would be appropriate for working from home only. But when it comes to hybrid arrangements, it creates multiple work locations. So something to consider for workstation setup when considering hybrid arrangements. We're going to talk a little bit about the identified areas of pain and injury for remote work through the survey. So for reported pain when teleworking, the hot colors in the figure represent the frequency of reported pain. And as indicated here, the top 3 body areas were the same as the Cincinnati study. So you can see the neck, shoulders, and lower back were the most frequent body areas of reported pain. And the Cincinnati study also indicated the neck and head, upper back and shoulders, and lower back as well as the top 3. Over 80% of respondents did not report an injury through the survey, but we see that 20% report a physical or mental injury, and this could be independent or both. Looking into the types of physical injuries, sprains and strains associated with gradual exposure, such as MSD or repetitive strain injuries, were the most common type of physical injury reported. and 86% of MSDs were based on frequent users of mobile devices. So out of the 69 total, 59 reported were frequently using mobile devices, and 52 of those were laptop users. 2 of those were regular tablet users, and 5 of them were reporting frequent use of laptops and tablets. So breaking it down by body area, we see the top 3 areas noted for pain are also relevant for the types of MSDs. So the neck, shoulder, and low back also were identified within the top 4, and there was a tie for wrist and shoulder, so the wrist is also included as a high area of concern for MSD. So getting into the analysis, the first research question that we asked was, for those frequently using laptops at home, what workstation factors were associated with pain in the top 3 body areas? So we used Pearson correlation for each body area against individual factors, and it was performed to determine significant relationships. So for frequent laptop use, these were the factors that were significantly associated with reduced pain scores. So using external devices when working on a laptop was associated with reduced lower back pain. Increased use of an office chair was the only type of chair associated with reduced pain across body areas. When working in the seated posture, the back being in contact with the backrest was associated with reduced pain. And the ability to adjust the chair to support the body and the presence of a lumbar support and contact with the backrest also reduced pain scores. The traditional desk was the only work surface that was associated with reduced low back pain. And it's important to note that work pacing and breaks were associated with reduced pain scores across all 3 top body areas. Looking at the other end of the spectrum, looking at factors that were associated with increased pain score, the use of household furniture to sit and work, such as a kitchen chair, couch, bed arm, they all increased pain scores with increased use. Except for the couch with the shoulders. There was no significant association there. Exposure to non-optimal back and neck postures were associated with increased pain score. And frequently using a makeshift workstation or no work surface at all were associated with increased pain. So this is just a summary of common workstation setup and work organization factors that were associated with pain scores across all 3 of the top body areas. So for the reduced pain scores, sitting in an office chair, the ability to adjust your chair to support the way you'd like to sit, and having increased back contact with the back of the chair was correlated with reduced pain scores. As well, work pacing and breaks. So increasing the frequency of posture changes throughout the workday, reducing the duration of work before actually taking a break, and increasing the duration of active breaks to move throughout the workday all resulted in reducing pain scores. On the other end, we have increased associations with pain. So sitting in household furniture or using temporary work surfaces were associated with increased pain scores across all 3 body areas, and working in non-optimal postures such as neck flexion, extension, or upper body twist or bent sideways, those were associated with increased pain scores. Our second research question was understanding the characteristics of work which were different between laptop users reporting MSD versus no reports of MSD. When comparing the frequent mobile device users who reported MSD to those who did not, several work from home factors were different between the 2 groups, and I have them all listed here in the table. So the use of all external devices that were listed for the laptop were different between those who reported MSD and those who did not. The use of a folding chair and bed arm or bed cushion were different between groups. Exposure to non-optimal back and neck postures were different between groups, which was similar with what we found for the pain and discomfort. And there are two other factors that had significant difference between the two groups: the makeshift sit-stand workstation and wearing glasses while working on the computer. So to sum up what we've reviewed already, 67% of respondents would prefer a hybrid working arrangement post-pandemic, and 49 to 63% of those felt this preference would be supported by their employer. The main reasons for them wanting this arrangement that were listed were transportation and commuting time and work-life balance. And it's important to note that the home work environment and their comfort in their home work environment influence preferences for the amount of time they preferred working at home. Also, work factors associated with discomfort and or MSD when working on mobile computing devices were supporting the body in optimal working postures. And through that, considering external devices and appropriate supports to promote those optimal working positions, as well as incorporating regular movement and activity throughout the workday. Now that we've identified associated factors with discomfort and MSD in the home workstation, who is responsible for MSD prevention in a hybrid work arrangement? It's important to note that as per the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the employer has the greatest responsibility for MSD prevention in the workplace. MSD hazards in the workplace are covered by the General Duties Clause of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And although the Act does not apply to workers' private residence, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act applies to workers who sustain a personal injury in the course of his or her employment. So what I mean by this is if a worker is injured at home during the course of their employment, a valid claim would be accepted for employers covered under WSIB. So this reinforces the importance of MSD prevention in all work locations, especially due to the cumulative nature of MSD. So as we know, hybrid work arrangements include the office, and as per the Act, employers are responsible for taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker, and ensuring that the Internal Responsibility System, or IRS, is established, promoted, and functions successfully. So this includes employers, supervisors, and workers. Everyone has a role to play in keeping workplaces healthy and safe. And the employer is responsible for also establishing MSD prevention roles for the Internal Responsibility System. They're also responsible for incorporating MSD prevention into the health and safety policy and the program, instructing and inform and supervise workers to protect their health and safety. So what I mean by this is provide any training or resources on computer workstation setup and work methods, as well as understanding the signs and symptoms of MSD and MSD hazards in the workplace. And they're also responsible to inform a worker or a person in authority over a worker about any hazards in the work and train that worker in the handling, storage, use, disposal, and transport of any equipment, substances, tools, and materials. And what I mean by that is implementing the controls for known MSD hazards in the office and providing training on use of those controls. So for the responsibility of supervisors, they need to make workers fully aware of MSD hazards that may be encountered in the office and ensure that they work safely. So using those safe work methods we were talking about. Responding to any of the MSD hazards that are brought to their attention by workers, and this includes taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker. And finally, the workers are also responsible. They need to report MSD hazards in the workplace to their supervisor or their employer, working safely and following safe work practices, using provided devices properly and personal protective equipment for the job, and they are responsible to participate in the health and safety and MSD prevention programs established for their workplace. So everyone has a role in MSD prevention. Getting into some recommendations based on our findings. Including MSD prevention into the health and safety program helps organizations with controlling MSD hazards in the workplace. So the MSD prevention guideline for Ontario is a 10-step process which follows the PDCA cycle framework, and that aligns with the CSA and ISO health and safety standards. So it starts with setting the foundation for prevention with management commitment through policy and program development. The first step after that is the planning phase, so preparing and scheduling MSD prevention activities. Then the do phase, so this would be the race cycle that you see in the diagram on the right, executing hazard intervention cycle and providing training on the controls that were identified. The check phase, have your targets and goals been achieved through these activities? And finally, act, communicating the results of the program and identifying successes and gaps for program improvement. So that's a very high-level summary of the 10-step process for MSD prevention and how to incorporate that into a health and safety program. We also have a resource in the link here that will be shared when we post the presentation. Feel free to go there to check out how to integrate these 10 steps into your health and safety program. So getting a little bit more in detail in the steps for the employers. So the first step is management commitment and leadership. So when we think about hybrid workers, it's creating that policy around organizational commitment to MSD prevention for hybrid staff, which includes setting clear expectations around the work arrangement. So how much time spent working at home from in the office at the workplace, and the work hours and tasks and deadlines that are expected of hybrid workers. Always focusing on positive organizational culture with open communication between staff and supervisors. And then finally, providing workers with the supports required to perform their tasks safely. Okay, so the plan steps involve worker participation, which starts with training workers on awareness of MSD and MSD hazards and computer-based work. When workers are aware of hazards, they can actively participate in controlling hazards to prevent MSD. So again, it's all about the internal responsibility system and knowing that we have to engage all different levels of the workplace in order to have a successful MSD prevention program. And then the next step is establishing a process for how to support identifying, assessing, and controlling MSD hazards in the office. So using a hazard ID checklist or the Quick Start guideline for office can assist with screening for MSD hazards, and establishing a process for determining the appropriate controls and implementing them. So such as equipment or training on work methods, depending on the hazards that have been identified. Survey results indicated that use of external devices with the laptop were associated with reduced lower back pain scores. Some potential control ideas for mobile computing devices are compact equipment to position the laptop and promote optimal working postures. So these devices can be easily transported and used between work locations. The foldable laptop riser is very low profile and can fit easily in a bag. Same with the compact keyboard and the wireless mouse. I also wanted to mention that these are just some considerations. The required controls for MSD hazards will depend on the individual workstation and the tasks that that person is performing. So these are just some high-level considerations. The results also indicated that use of a chair that can be adjusted to support the body with increased backrest contact was associated with reduced pain scores. So training on adjustable features and understanding the interaction with workstation setup allows a worker to support their body based on the work they perform. So our bodies are meant to move, and our survey results show that frequent posture change and movement is associated with reduced pain scores across different body areas. So consider being proactive and implement controls for prolonged sitting or standing and sedentary behavior. So some recommendations I have were to set reminders in your devices to change your posture. So this could be on your phone or a reminder in your calendar on your computer. Another idea, oh, sorry about that. Another idea would be daily stretch break programs. So engaging all workers, whether virtual or in person, to participate and get out of their chair and move their body throughout the workday. So some recommendations for hybrid and remote workers for anyone working in multiple locations. There's resources available for optimal device setup and work methods, such as the Quick Start Guideline for Office. Choosing a workspace which suits your needs. So it allows you to set up equipment and supports as recommended to adopt those optimal postures. And finally, making sure that you report MSD hazards and symptoms, such as pain and discomfort, at an early point to allow the organization to intervene and do an assessment to make sure that the appropriate controls are in place to prevent discomfort from getting any worse. So I mentioned the Quick Start Guideline for Office a couple times. This is a free resource on the MSD Prevention Guideline for Ontario. It includes 8 posters on computer workstation setup and best practices for MSD prevention in the office. And here I have just a few free online resources for more information on MSD prevention. So the MSD Prevention Guideline for Ontario website provides step-by-step guidance on program development and resources for MSD prevention in the workplace. A technical brief by the World Health Organization and International Labor Organization provides guidance for promoting health and safety and well-being for home office-based users, and it's based on current standards and guidelines for this working group. And also the CRE-MSD Events page if you want access to past webinar recordings and resources from past events as well. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kim, for your thoughtful and informative presentation today. I'm just going to kick off our questions with this question, and then I'll look to see what has come in through the chat. In your presentation, you indicated that 67% of respondents would prefer hybrid working arrangements. What were the reasons, or do we know the reasons for individuals wanting to return to the office 5 days a week?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, we did not collect this information through the survey on those individuals who are wanting to return back to the office 5 days a week post-pandemic, but it's definitely an important question to ask and engage workers about, reasonings as to why they would want to go back to the office versus having a hybrid work arrangement. It's something you would want to consider before executing a plan for a hybrid work.
So as a follow-up to that, do you think there might be another survey to see if there have been any changes to employer or employee practices based on these results? For example, efforts of employers to provide additional support due to the adaptation of hybrid work?
This is definitely something that we were considering. For those who were able to participate in the survey, we did ask if they were willing to participate in a follow-up survey. So definitely something that we've considered to gain more insight into that area, but more to come.
Okay. Amy's got a question in here. Is it an employer's responsibility to provide pay for an ergo assessment and provide office equipment recommended to an employee in hybrid work from home setup? Excellent question.
That is a good question. Not sure if I'm the appropriate person to provide the response, but we'll definitely tie back on who's responsible for that and get back to you.
Okay. Kim, could you speak to the number of organizations, or were there any organizations that asked us if they could do a survey just for their organization? I know we offered a code.
Yes.
Did many take that up?
I believe, I'm going off memory, I think there was 6 organizations that requested a company code that we could identify which participants entered that code into the survey, and we were able to, as soon as they passed a certain threshold of individuals participating in the survey, we were able to provide organizational related results to them.
Great, thank you. Candace is asking, what's the cost in terms of employers providing employees a total cost or stipend in terms of ergonomic equipment? Not sure if we know that.
I think that would definitely be something that would be worked out internally within a policy and some sort of program, depending on, you know, the current state of what equipment they had in the office versus, you know, what they I think it's determined by the organization, really. There's no rules for that.
Okay. In your presentation, you did mention that it's important to move, you know, posture-wise, changing our position. Can you speak to the overall movement piece? Is it about just changing your posture, or is it about like getting away and out of the chair in terms of MSD prevention?
Yeah, there's definitely studies that show different recommendations for posture change versus active movement. Through our analysis, when we were looking at pain and discomfort, there was positive associations with increased frequency of posture changes, as well as increased amount of active work breaks throughout the day. But I would have to do a little bit different analysis to see if there was thresholds that were different, if that's what you're asking.
Yes, and I know that Dr. Callahan is going to be presenting um, a webinar in March around hybrid seating, sitting and standing. So I'm sure we'll gain some insight then.
Definitely.
Christine has asked, in the slide for controlling MSD hazards support the body, the illustration and comments suggest elevated footrest. Why is this recommended as a standard? The other 4 items are general. This one specifically indicates elevated footrest as opposed to feet supported.
That's a good point. So I think it's just to show the feet need to be supported, and the footrest is maybe one method on how you can support based on your anthropometrics, based on your workstation setup. So I did mention it's all about like your workstation setup and how you're performing work tasks to determine what specific controls are required to reduce the exposure to MSD hazards. So it's not a requirement to have a footrest, but it could be a solution to support the feet in a seated posture.
Thanks, Kim, for that. So if someone does have a footrest, it looks like in that diagram that it's one foot that's going on the footrest. Is it supposed to be both feet if you have a footrest, or is it all about the comfort and that 90-degree angle from your seat?
So that's a little bit deceiving. I feel like it should be your feet should be on the same surface, whether that be fully supported on the floor in that 90-degree knee posture or fully supported on a footrest in a 90-degree posture. So I'm thinking potentially what we were getting at there is you could achieve the same thing just based on your posture, right? So based on your leg length and your anthropometrics, if your feet are in full contact with the floor in that posture, then that's fine. If your feet do not contact the floor in that posture, you're going to want to have some sort of support to support your legs properly in that posture.
Okay, so I see some other people are on this wavelength. Is that 90-90-90 rule still a standard?
So it's referenced in the CSA standard for office ergonomics. From what I understand, yes, but there are different working postures. So obviously we don't want someone just in that static posture working in the same position all day. We want to encourage movement throughout the workday. So there's like recline seated postures, and there's other variations that you can use to change up your posture, but support the body as well throughout the workday.
Okay. And besides decreasing strain and increasing comfort, did you collect any, or did we collect any metrics correlating productivity to working from home setup, or how it would relate to strain?
Unfortunately, we didn't, but I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at in a follow-up survey, was how that impacted, how different working arrangements impacted productivity throughout the workday. So I think it's a very interesting question, but we didn't ask those questions for the scope of this survey.
Great, thank you. And are there any recommendations for a seamless working from home and at the office?
What do you mean by seamless?
I'm interpreting that SUDA means MSD prevention wise. Should I be using the same equipment, same type of chair?
There's no one setup that will, there's no one setup for an ideal workstation. It all depends on, you know, your desk height. It depends on the seat adjustability. It depends on so many different factors at home versus in the office. Typically, we don't have the exact same desk in both locations, right? So that's one factor that's going to be different and will dictate how you're set up at home versus in the office. So it's looking at all the factors together to determine, are there any MSD hazards that are created by the combination of those factors in your workstation setup, and how do I mitigate those or eliminate those MSD hazards through the appropriate controls. So there's no one way to set up properly. It's all dependent on your tasks and the equipment that you have to work with.
Okay, thank you. And so the legalities, challenging question here. What are the legalities around the employer only providing an ergonomic assessment to those who are medically require it due to the cost, while ignoring the rest of the non-medically required requests and or staff needing an ergonomic assessment?
Yeah, good question. I feel like that's beyond the scope of my expertise, so I will take that question back and get back to you on that.
Okay. Well, Kim, based on these questions, is there anything else that you wanted to highlight?
If you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at all of the survey questions and all of the responses, the results are actually available on the CRE-MSD website. So if there are, I did take a look at certain associations, but with large data sets and the amount of questions that we ask, there's different ways that you can look at data for different relationships. So if you're going through the survey results and you have a specific question that you're interested in the answer to, please feel free to come forward. We can definitely look at different relationships to answer certain questions. So please feel free to contact me if you have any specific relationships that you're interested in.
Thanks, Kim. And I notice we have a question about dual monitors. And I just want to point out that we do have a webinar coming up on also February, on MSD prevention and ultra-wide computer displays for office work. And this question asks about dual monitors. They're often utilized in office and at home. And was this question asked, or did our survey reveal anything related to the setup or guidelines for this?
So because we were asking survey questions and we weren't actually looking and analyzing someone's workstation setup, we were limited to the detail that we could pull out. So I knew how frequently a person was using certain devices like external monitors and laptop risers to change the screen position, but I didn't know exactly, where they were positioned to, or if they were positioned to the recommended height and distance. So there's limitations to the survey versus actual assessment of someone's workstation. So I feel like we don't have that level of detail from the survey, but I hope that answers the question.
I think that does. And this is our last question. And Candace, thank you for being so engaged. What has been your largest takeaway in terms of implementation for the employers based on the survey results? An MSI program in terms of considering both ISO and CSA standards.
For sure. I think the biggest takeaway based on the results is with hybrid work being involved in the workplace, in the office setting, as well as in the home setting, although there isn't the legal responsibilities through the act for the employer to be responsible for the home office setup, I think it's really important based on knowing the cumulative nature of like how an MSD progresses, to be aware and support their employees in their home workstation as well, because that'll impact their exposure to MSD hazards. So covering the training and making workers aware of hazards in the office and also at home can help them in identifying the concern areas and maybe troubleshooting through both workstations. So training is very important for people to be aware of what MSDs are, what the symptoms are, so that they can report them, and recognizing the hazards so they can control them as well. So having a program where you acknowledge like there could be MSD hazards in both work settings, empowering your workers to understand what those hazards are, to be able to control them, and reaching out to the workplace when you're having an issue is very, very important for MSD prevention.
Thank you, Kim. So we know that training is really, really important, and also the resources to support that training and competencies of the trainer. And the MSD Prevention Guideline website has excellent resources to help employers and employees with MSD prevention, especially doing hybrid work. And our CRE-MSD website has some excellent webinars that have resources attached to them, including the presenter slide decks. So I encourage all of you to come back again and join us on February 2nd, when we will look at the impact of ultra-wide computer displays for office work. And then in March, Dr. Jack Callahan will be presenting on the space between sitting and standing, hybrid seating. Is the juice worth the squeeze? So thank you all very much, and a big thank you to Kim, and we hope to see you back again in February. Have a great day.